When we look at a poem, we start off with the form, the rhyme, and the rhythm. So looking at this poem, we know immediately that this is a Petrarchan sonnet. We know it's a sonnet anyway, because it's 14 lines. And by looking at the type of rhyme scheme, we can work out what type of sonnet it is. We also need to know the narrative voice. Now, understanding exactly what a Petrarchan sonnet isn't overly important. What's important for the purposes of talking about this poem is understanding the regularity of the structure and the regularity of the rhythm and the regularity of the rhyme and how that relates possibly to the meaning. The first thing I'm going to do is read through the poem. And as I read through the poem, the thing we need to think about is the narrative voice, the regularity of the rhythm, the regularity of the rhyme. So, I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that it sculpture well those passions red which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, king of kings, look on my works, ye mighty in despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." So because it's a sonnet and we want to work out what kind of sonnet it is, we need to first of all think a little bit about the rhyme scheme and how that works. Now we know that land rhymes with sand. We know that stone rhymes with frown. It's important to remember, of course, accent. So when we think about the way I've pronounced them, that's not necessarily the way Percy Shelley would have pronounced them, or people in his time and people around him. So frown and stone, we know more than likely have some kind of rhyme to them. Then we have the word command, and that would rhyme with land, stand, command. So you have the A rhyme there. And then you have a new rhyme coming up, that is read and fed. You have things, so that's a new rhyme. And what does things rhyme with? Well, kings, so that's down there. And then appear, does that rhyme with despair and bear? So that's a new rhyme. So appear, despair and bear, and then decay and away. So what we have is a rhyme scheme that goes A, B, A, B, A, C, D, C, E, D, E, F, E, F. So there's something not quite right with the rhyme scheme. It doesn't work perfectly, and a Petrarchan sonnet would quite normally be a very regular rhythm, a very regular rhyme, It wouldn't have a rhyming couplet because that's what you'd probably get with an Elizabethan sonnet or Shakespearean sonnet. So there is a change in a Petrarchan sonnet, which normally happens about halfway through the sonnet. Again, that doesn't quite happen as normal. So what we have is a regular rhyme. There's something wrong in it. He's changed things slightly. It's a little bit irregular. So there's a mixture between the regularity, the strong rhyme, and then also a certain weakness in the rhyme. So something wrong, there's a weakness in the rhyme. And then we know that it starts with first person, but the first person is not the person telling the story. It's a traveler from an antique land. So what we have is a third person really telling the story. So it's a story told by someone else. So actually it's a third person narrator. It's a story told by someone else. And then we have this other narrator who is Ozymandias, who talks about himself. But again, that's just reported because he has had his words inscribed on something. So there is someone else in there. And what that does is it distances the narrative voice. So the narrative voice is very distant in this poem. And so it becomes a kind of story, something far away, which leads to thinking a little bit about Ozymandias, who has just become a story. So Ozymandias himself is just the story. The once mighty man has been forgotten and has just become something people tell others. So he is himself nothing more than a myth and a story. It's also really important to remember people like Percy, Bryce, Shelley in the 19th century. Percy, Bryce, Shelley travelled far and wide, but not many people did. He was a wealthy man, so he went to lots of different places. But most people in England wouldn't have gone or even seen pictures of or really understood of a place like Egypt. So for them, it's a very distant place. It's not a place that they know very well. So it's very exotic. So this antique land is a very exotic place. And again, adds to that sense of something far away, something told by someone else, something that's a story that's not necessarily very well known. So that's a really important idea about the narrative voice, the distance which creates something around the meaning, because in the end the poem is about time and power and the loss of power over time. A really important thing for Percy Bryce Shelley. We do talk a little bit about context, and it's important to remember that Percy Bryce Shelley was a romantic, although one of the later romantics. And as a romantic, it was a Democrat, no fan of kings, believed in the power of nature, as did other romantics, although nature is also something quite dangerous to Percy Bryce Shelley, but power of nature. And so he's a believer in equality, strongly influenced by the beliefs of people like Rousseau. So a believer in equality. So let's go through the poem and think a little bit about, we've thought a little bit about the rhyme, which is regular, but there's something wrong in it. The rhythm is very regular again, but it shifts and changes. It's not all iambic, it shifts around. So although there's a regular rhythm, again, there's something wrong with that rhythm. So let's start with the poem and go through it line by line. We thought about the rhyme, we thought about the rhythm, we thought about the narrative voice, we thought a little bit about Percy Bryce Shelley and his own views, which were quite important in this poem. So, I met a traveller from an antique land who said, and then we have a colon, and this really tells us what they're about to say. And this is the story that he's heard from this other person. Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. So this is the thing that has made him think, and the story that is being told. So in this massive desert, there are these two legs that just sit with nothing on top of them, trunkless. Trunk is your body, so there's nothing attached. Legs of stone stand in the desert. Then there's a full stop in the middle. And this is really important because what you start to see through the poem is quite a lot of caesura. So I'll put those kinds of things in blue, hopefully just to change the colors around so you can see them easier. So caesura, which breaks the rhythm of the poem and creates part of that weakness. So we've got the enjambment, stone stand, so the lines, the run-on lines. Apologies for my mispronunciation, but my French is pretty poor. So again, that breaks the rhythm. This is 0. So then, near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. A visage is a face. And so there's this head lying right next to it. And some of you in your lessons may have seen a picture of that visage. It obviously exists because Ozymandias is based on a real person, on a real statue, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that it sculptor well those passions red which yet survive. And what we have is essentially from near them on the sand, a really long sentence that really only ends after despair. So it's about 1, 2, 3, it's about 7, 8 lines long, the sentence. So one really important chunk of meaning when you think about sentences. So half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip. So something about this, the imagery of that, what he looks like, and sneer of cold command. So like a facial expression that shows a real disdain for people around them. Sneer of cold command. Tell that it sculptor well those passions red which yet survive. So those passions yet survive because the sculpture is still there. The head, although it's broken and it is a shattered visage, stamped on those lifeless things. We haven't really looked at the word of shattered, which is really quite important actually as an adjective. So you might want to just put that in there. I mean, it is broken into pieces. If we see the actual statue, you'll see it isn't shattered into pieces, and perhaps that's part of the idea of what Shelley has heard. He hasn't himself seen it, someone has told him about it. Stamped on those lifeless things, and that lifeless is quite important because he's gone. Statue is all that remains. The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. Now the them, we have to imagine, I suppose, is the people that he ruled over. And on the pedestal, these words appear. And then there's this declaration by Ozymandias, which has faded with time and just shows how foolish rulers are, in the sense, or the idea of immortality really is, because although he is kind of immortal, my name is Ozymandias, Kings of my works, it is still there. it says, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." And then the next line is, "Nothing beside remains." So those two lines are really important because there's a juxtaposition there, a contrast between, or even an irony between the idea that he asks people to look on his mighty works, and at one time they were there. There was this beautiful, incredible, powerful city, but now nothing is left. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, so it's massive, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Now you might talk about this alliteration, boundless and bare. I'm always a bit concerned about students talking about alliteration because it's quite hard. You have to think about sound and only talk about sound. So when it is boundless and bare, you've got this plosive sound of the B. It maybe suggests the size of it. If you want, you've got to decide, but it must be something about the sound. And then, of course, you've got the lone and level sans stretch. And maybe the sibilance of the sans stretch just gives you a sense of how big it is or how far. So these last three lines are really important. Nothing beside remains. A sentence all on its own, sitting there. Powerful in itself, really summing up a lot of the poem. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level stand stretch far away. And in that is really those last few lines, those last three lines, sums up essentially the whole of Shelley's point that power is finite, that everybody dies eventually, nothing lasts forever. Perhaps even art. So we have the idea of this sculpture, which is in itself an art form, but the art has been shattered, it is broken. It reminds us to some extent of something, but even art itself will not last forever. Everything will die, everything will fade. The one thing that remains is nature, the desert. The desert eventually erodes everything and destroys everything because nature is immortal. So the only thing that's immortal is the earth. We are something that will be forgotten, become a story, something people talk about, something we don't really know about. But the thing that will remain is what we can see, and that will be the sand. And that is it.